The iron was still hot in my hand when the siren started screaming. I dropped Dimitri's uniform on the kitchen table, his name stitched across the chest in blue thread. I'd sewn myself, and that's when the first jet tore across the sky so low I felt it in my bones. Not Russian. The markings were different. NATO. I'd counted 573 drones in 3 days. Counted them like rosary beads while I cooked, while I cleaned, while I pretended this war would somehow skip over our village like it had skipped over so many others. But when that jet's shadow crossed my cracked window, I knew our luck had just run out. The explosion hit before I could move. The whole house shook. Photographs crashed off the wall, my wedding day, Dimitri's baptism, my husband's funeral glass shattering across the floor in a spray of memories. I grabbed the counter to stay upright, and through the smoke pouring past my window, I saw Katya. She was running, sprinting down the middle of the street in her house slippers, clutching that framed photo of her son, the one who died in Mariupol 2 years ago, pressed against her chest like a shield. Her gray hair had come loose from its bun. Her face was pure terror. "Katya!" I shouted, but my voice disappeared into the siren's wail. She didn't look back, just kept running toward the western edge of the village, toward Poland, toward anywhere that wasn't here. I'd never seen her move that fast. Didn't know she still could. Another jet screamed overhead. Then another. I stumbled to the window, my hands shaking, and watched them circle back like wolves. They were flying a pattern, protecting something, or preparing for something. That's when I saw it. The Eastern Road. Through the black smoke rising from whatever they'd just bombed, I could see them coming. Trucks. Military trucks. 12, maybe 15, rolling toward the village in a long green line. Russian flags snapping in the wind. They were still 2 kilometers out, but they weren't stopping. My chest went tight. We were in the middle, right in the middle. The NATO jets on one side, clearing a path. The Russians on the other, closing in. And our village, my village, was about to become the battlefield neither side cared about. I looked down at Dimitri's uniform, still warm from the iron, the fabric soft under my fingertips. He was stationed in Kharkiv, 300 kilometers away. Safe, I'd told myself. Safe enough. But now I wondered if anywhere was safe enough anymore. The jets banked hard, their engines roaring, and I saw something detach from the belly of one of them. A missile. Silent at first, then screaming as it fell. The explosion lit up the entire eastern field, orange and white, and the shockwave rattled my teeth. They were targeting the convoy. I should have run. Should have grabbed my coat, my documents, whatever I could carry, and followed Katya toward the border. That's what a smart woman would have done. But I just stood there, watching the sky turn into a war I didn't understand. My phone was on the counter. I grabbed it, hands trembling, trying to pull up Dimitri's number. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. The screen flickered, once, twice, then died completely. The power was out. The house went dark except for the fires burning outside, casting orange shadows across my kitchen walls. The refrigerator went silent. The hum of the old heater stopped. Even the siren seemed to fade into something distant and hopeless. I pressed the power button on my phone again and again, like prayer, like pleading. Nothing. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, please." That's when I heard them. Boots. Heavy. Multiple pairs. Hitting the wooden steps outside my front door. I froze. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. The footsteps stopped right outside. I could hear breathing. Low voices speaking a language I couldn't quite make out through the ringing in my ears. Russian? Ukrainian? I didn't know. Couldn't tell. My heart was hammering so hard I thought they'd hear it. I looked around the dark kitchen, searching for something, anything to defend myself with. The iron was still on the table, a knife in the drawer. But what was I going to do? Fight soldiers with a kitchen knife? I was 73 years old. I'd buried a husband, raised 3 children, survived famines and Soviet winters and the collapse of everything I'd ever known. But I'd never been this afraid. The door handle started to turn. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, and watched as the door began to swing open. A silhouette filled the doorway. Tall, armed, backlit by the fires burning outside. I couldn't see the uniform, couldn't see the flag, couldn't see anything except the shape of a man with a gun, stepping into my home, and the terrible, crushing realization that I had no idea which side he was on. The jets screamed overhead again, and the soldier stepped inside. The door exploded inward. I screamed, couldn't help it, and stumbled back against the counter as the figure lurched through the doorway. Not Russian, Ukrainian colors, blue and yellow on his sleeve, half covered in mud and blood. He was just a boy. Maybe 22, 23 at most, Dmitri's age. His left shoulder was dark with blood, spreading across his uniform like spilled wine, and he was clutching a radio in his other hand, whispering into it with the kind of desperation that made my stomach drop. Corridor holding but need confirmation on civilian routes. His voice cracked. Russians advancing from eastern checkpoint, 12 vehicles, maybe more. He swayed on his feet, and I saw blood dripping onto my wooden floor. Dark red drops, one after another, like a clock ticking down. "Sit," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're bleeding." He looked up at me, and that's when he saw it. Dmitri's uniform, still lying on the kitchen table where I'd dropped it, the name stitched clear across the chest. Something in his face cracked. "Your son?" he whispered. "Grandson." I moved toward him, reaching for his good arm. "Stationed in Kharkiv." He nodded slowly, like that explained everything. Like that made us family somehow. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was still. The houses looked empty." "Sit down before you pass out." He obeyed, collapsing into my kitchen chair with a grunt of pain. The radio in his hand kept crackling with voices, overlapping, urgent, military frequencies, coordinates, things I didn't understand. I grabbed kitchen towels from the drawer, the good ones I saved for holidays, and pressed them against his shoulder. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. "What's your name?" I asked. "Alexander." Another explosion outside, closer this time, and the walls shook. "You need to leave, now." The NATO jets they're clearing an evacuation corridor, but the Russians know. They're sending everything to close it before dawn. Evacuation corridor? My hands were shaking as I tied the towel tight around his shoulder. "To where?" "Poland, 15 kilometers west." He fumbled with his radio, adjusting the frequency. "But they're setting up artillery. If they close the corridor..." His radio crackled loud. "Repeat. Convoy stopped at village entrance, setting up firing positions." Alexander's face went white. I looked out the window, past the smoke, past the burning field, and saw them. The Russian trucks had stopped. They weren't moving anymore. Soldiers were jumping out, hauling equipment, pointing things toward the village, toward us. One of the trucks had something big mounted on the back, something that looked like a cannon, or worse, and it was turning, slowly, deliberately, scanning the street, scanning until it stopped, pointed directly at my house. "God in heaven," I whispered. Alexander tried to stand, winced, collapsed back into the chair. He grabbed the radio with his good hand, pressing it close to his mouth. "Command, this is Unit 7-4. I have a civilian in the hot zone. Need immediate." Static. "Command, do you copy?" More static. "Command, please." The radio went dead. Complete silence. Not even the crackle of empty frequency. Just nothing. Alexander stared at it, his face pale, blood still seeping through the towel I'd wrapped. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He shook it. Pressed buttons. Adjusted dials. Nothing. They jammed it, he said quietly. The Russians. They're jamming all frequencies. Outside, I heard engines revving, shouting in Russian, metal scraping against metal, the sound of something being loaded. I looked at the cannon pointed at my house, then at Alexander, bleeding in my kitchen chair, then at Dmitri's uniform on the table, still warm from the iron, with his name stitched across the chest in thread I'd sewn with my own hands. How long? I asked. What? How long until they fire? Alexander met my eyes. His were dark brown, young, terrified. Minutes, he said. Maybe less. The NATO jets screamed overhead again, circling, but they sounded different now, farther away, like they were pulling back. I thought of Katya, running toward the border with her son's photograph. I thought of Dmitri, 300 kilometers away in Kharkiv, who'd never know what happened to me. I thought of 47 years in this house, of my children's first steps, of my husband's last breath, of every meal cooked and every prayer whispered within these walls. And I thought of that cannon, aimed at my kitchen window, ready to erase it all. Alexander tried to stand again, gasping with pain. We have to move! Now! Through the window, I saw the Russian soldiers step back from the cannon, saw one of them pull a cord, saw the barrel adjust, just slightly, finding its final angle. Too late, I whispered. Blood was soaking through the towel I'd wrapped around his shoulder, more than before, too much. He was pale, swaying, barely able to stand, but his eyes were locked on mine with an urgency that made my hands shake. Then we waited out, I said. You can't even walk. We don't wait. He cut me off, his voice harsh. You don't understand. When they come through, they won't ask questions. They'll clear every house, every room. Everyone. I looked around my kitchen. 47 years. I'd raised 3 children in this house, taught them to read at that table, nursed them through fevers in the bedroom upstairs, buried my husband in the yard out back, under the apple tree he'd planted the day we moved in. The wedding photo was still on the floor, glass shattered, his face smiling up at me through the cracks. I can't just leave, I whispered. Then you'll die here. Alexander tried to take a step, grimaced, caught himself. And so will I. Is that what you want? Through the back window, I could see it. The small wooden cross marking my husband's grave, barely visible through the smoke. I'd carved his name myself, painted it white, laid flowers there every Sunday for 9 years. 9 years of Sundays. I'm sorry, Alexander said, softer now. I know what I'm asking. But those trucks, they're not stopping. NATO's trying to hold a corridor open, but if we don't move now... An explosion cut him off. Not close. Maybe half a kilometer east. But big enough to shake the dishes in my cabinet, to crack the last intact window, to send more photographs sliding off the shelf. My daughter's graduation. My son's wedding. Dmitri in his uniform. The day he enlisted. All of it scattered across the floor like trash. How far? I asked. To the corridor? Alexander pulled out a crumpled map from his vest, spread it on the table with shaking hands. 2 kilometers west. The NATO jets are holding it open, see these coordinates, but the Russians are trying to close it from both sides. If they succeed before we get there. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. I looked at the map. At the thin line marked in red pencil. At the arrows showing Russian positions closing in like a vice. At the small dot labeled with our village name, right in the center of it all. Can you walk 2 kilometers? I asked. He met my eyes. Lied. Yes. I didn't believe him, but I also didn't have a choice. Then we go. I grabbed Dmitri's uniform from the table, couldn't leave it, wouldn't, and stuffed it into an old canvas bag. Added my husband's wedding ring from the dish by the sink. A photograph of my children, my identity papers. Everything else would have to stay. 47 years, reduced to a bag I could carry. Alexander was already at the door, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his wounded shoulder. Stay close to me. When I say run, you run. When I say stop, you... The sky exploded. Not an explosion. Something else. Something that screamed and burned and turned the night into day. I looked up through the broken window and saw them NATO jets, 3 of them, flying so low I could feel the heat and then the missiles. Dozens of them. Falling like stars, like rain, like the end of the world. They hit the eastern field where the Russian convoy had stopped, and the entire horizon turned orange and white. The blast wave hit a second later, slamming into the house so hard it knocked me sideways. The table flipped. The shelves collapsed. Every remaining photograph crashed to the floor. Alexander grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight despite the blood loss. "Now!" he shouted over the roar. "We run now!" He yanked me toward the door, and I didn't resist. Couldn't. The house was shaking apart around us, walls cracking, ceiling raining dust and plaster. Through the back window I saw my husband's cross tilting, falling, disappearing into smoke. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the ghost of him. "I'm so sorry." Then we were outside. The heat hit me first, like opening an oven door. The entire eastern field was burning, flames 50 feet high, black smoke pouring into the sky. The NATO jets screamed overhead again, circling, hunting, and somewhere in the distance I heard return fire Russian anti-aircraft. Maybe tracers lighting up the darkness. Alexander pulled me forward, stumbling, nearly falling. "The corridor west, keep moving." I couldn't see anything through the smoke, couldn't breathe. My lungs burned with every gasp. But I kept moving because his hand was on my arm, and because stopping meant dying, and because somewhere ahead was Poland and safety and a life that didn't end in fire. We made it to the street and stopped. The corridor route the path Alexander had marked on his map was blocked. A building had collapsed across the road, burning debris scattered everywhere, flames leaping from window to window. The heat was unbearable, impassable. "No," Alexander breathed. "No, there was supposed to be..." That's when I saw it. Half buried in the mud, in the middle of the street, face up in a puddle of dirty water. Katya's photograph. The one of her son. The one she'd been clutching when she ran past my window. Gold frame cracked. Glass shattered. His young face staring up at the burning sky. But no Katya. No body. No blood. Just the photograph. Dropped. Abandoned. Empty. I picked it up with shaking hands. The frame was still warm. "She was here," I whispered. "She made it this far." Alexander was scanning the street, the burning buildings, the blocked corridor. "We need another route. If we cut through the..." An explosion. Close. So close the ground jumped beneath my feet. Then another. And another. Russian artillery. Shells landing in a line, marching toward us, each one closer than the last. Alexander grabbed my hand. His palm was slick with blood. "Run," he said. And we ran. We weren't alone. Through the smoke, I saw them dozens of people running in the same direction, scattered across the street like leaves in a storm. Mostly women, old men, a teenage boy carrying his grandmother on his back. All of us heading west, toward the corridor, toward whatever slim chance NATO was holding open. Alexander stumbled beside me, his breathing ragged, but he kept moving, kept pulling me forward whenever I slowed down. "Stay with the group," he gasped. "Safer in numbers." A woman rushed past us, maybe 50, dragging a suitcase that bounced and scraped against the broken pavement. It hit a pothole and burst open, spilling its contents across the mud. Children's toys. A stuffed rabbit. Building blocks. A tiny shoe. She stopped, staring down at them, her face crumbling. "Leave it!" someone shouted. "Keep moving!" But she just stood there, frozen, while people streamed around her. looking at that tiny shoe like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. I wanted to stop, wanted to help her gather them up, but Alexander's grip tightened on my arm. "We can't," he whispered. "I'm sorry. We can't." The woman sank to her knees in the mud, reaching for the stuffed rabbit, and then we were past her, swallowed by the crowd, and I never saw her again. The NATO jets screamed overhead, lower than before, and I heard the whistle of something falling. An explosion bloomed behind us, Russian artillery, chasing us down the street, and the crowd surged forward in panic. Someone fell. An old man, maybe 70, clutching his chest as he went down. The crowd flowed around him like water. No one stopped. "Keep moving!" Alexander shouted, but I could hear the crack in his voice. The guilt. "We have to keep—" Another explosion. Closer. The shockwave knocked me sideways into a burned-out car, and I grabbed the hot metal to steady myself. My hands screamed with pain, but I held on, gasping, trying to find Alexander in the chaos. He was there, still standing, barely. "I'm here," I called out. That's when I saw her. Katya, collapsed behind the car, half hidden in the shadows, her gray hair matted with dirt and blood. She wasn't moving. For a terrible second, I thought she was dead. Then her chest rose, fell, rose again. "Katya!" I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands finding her face. "Katya, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, lost. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried to run." "You made it," I said, looking back at the street we'd come from. Maybe 300 meters. 300 meters of smoking pavement and burning buildings. "You made it this far. Not far enough." Her breathing was shallow, wrong. My heart, I felt it, like something breaking inside. Alexander crouched beside me, his face grim. "We need to move her. Can you stand?" Katya's hand found mine, squeezed weakly. "No, I can't. I tried, but I can't." "Then we'll carry you." "No." Her voice was firm despite the pain. "You can't. You're barely standing yourself, boy." And she looked at me. "She's already carrying too much." I was still holding her son's photograph. The frame was digging into my palm, the broken glass cutting my skin. I'd carried it 300 meters without even realizing. "I won't leave you," I said. "You will." Katya's other hand fumbled in her coat pocket, pulled out something folded. "Paper. You'll take this. And you'll deliver it. Promise me, Katya. Promise me." Her hand shot out, pressing the folded paper into my palm with surprising strength. I looked down at it. An address, written in shaky handwriting, somewhere in Krakow. "Who I started." "If you survive," Katya whispered, her eyes locked on mine, "you find that address. You tell them. You tell them I tried." A NATO jet roared overhead, and I looked up to see it silhouetted against the orange sky, black smoke trailing behind it. It fired something missiles, flares. I couldn't tell, and the eastern horizon lit up like dawn. "We have to go," Alexander said urgently. "Now. The artillery's getting closer." "Katya, please." 300 meters. She smiled, and there were tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I made it 300 meters. That's more than I thought I could." "It's not enough. It's all I have." Her hand went slack in mine. Not dead, not yet, but fading. Her breathing thin and rapid, her eyes starting to drift closed. "Promise me," she whispered one more time. I closed my fingers around the paper, around the address. "I promise." Alexander pulled me to my feet. "We have to—" The whistle, louder than before, closer, right on top of us. I looked up and saw them falling. Russian shells. 3, 4, maybe more, arcing through the smoke-filled sky, heading straight for our street. straight for us. Down! Alexander screamed, and he threw himself over me, over Katya, his body a shield against what was coming. The first shell hit 20 meters away. The second, 10. The third, I don't remember the explosion. Don't remember the sound, or the heat, or the moment the world turned inside out. I only remember waking up in a ditch, my ears ringing, my mouth full of dirt, and Alexander's hands under my arms, dragging me forward through the mud. Stay with me, he was saying, over and over. Stay with me, babushka. We're almost there. My vision was blurred. Double. I couldn't tell if it was smoke or blood or something broken in my head. But I could see the sky orange and black and churning and the NATO jets cutting through it one last time before they banked hard and disappeared into the clouds. Leaving us. Alexander. My voice came out wrong. Slurred. Don't talk. Just move. Left foot, right foot. That's it. I tried. God, I tried. But my legs wouldn't work right. Everything hurt. Everything was noise and confusion and the terrible certainty that I was going to die in this ditch, in this country that was tearing itself apart without ever seeing Dmitri again. But Alexander didn't let go. He pulled me up, held me upright when I stumbled, kept moving forward even though I could see the blood still pouring from his shoulder, even though he was barely standing himself. Around us, others were running, fewer than before, so many fewer. Where there had been dozens, now there were 20, maybe less. Old women clutching bags, men with children on their backs, all of us heading west through the smoke, through the fire, through what was left of the corridor NATO had carved for us. How far? I gasped. 1 kilometer, maybe less. Alexander's voice was rough, desperate. The border's close. I can see the... His words cut off as another explosion boomed behind us. Russian artillery, still hunting, but farther away now, falling behind. We kept moving. Minutes blurred into hours, or maybe it was seconds. I couldn't tell. The world had narrowed down to Alexander's hand on my arm, the ground beneath my feet, the sound of my own breathing. And then, through the smoke, I saw it. Lights. Clean white lights in the darkness. A checkpoint. Guards in different uniforms, Polish uniforms waving people through, shouting in accented Ukrainian. Hurry, this way, keep moving. The border. We'd made it. Alexander half carried me the last 100 meters. My legs gave out completely at the checkpoint, and I collapsed onto the pavement. A Polish guard rushed over, wrapping something around my shoulders, a silver blanket, crinkly and thin and asking questions I couldn't understand. She needs medical, Alexander said in broken English. And water, please. But they were already moving, lifting me, carrying me toward a tent with red crosses painted on the side. The world spun, tilted. I closed my eyes and felt hands checking my pulse, shining lights in my eyes. Voices speaking in Polish and Ukrainian and languages I couldn't place. When I opened my eyes again, it was dawn. Pale gray light was creeping across the sky, and I was lying on a cot in a refugee processing center. Other cots stretched in long rows around me. People sleeping, people crying, people staring at nothing. 43 of us, I heard someone say. 43 made it through the corridor. Out of 200 who'd started running. I looked down at my hands. Dimitri's uniform was still clutched in my right hand. Muddy, torn, but there. His name still visible across the chest. In my left hand, Katya's folded paper, the address in Krakow. Somehow, impossibly, I'd held onto both. You're awake. A volunteer appeared beside my cot. Young woman, maybe 30. How do you feel? Where's Alexander? My voice cracked. The soldier who... In surgery. The shoulder wound was bad, but they think he'll be okay. She smiled gently. He saved a lot of people last night, including you. I looked at the paper in my hand, at the address written in Katya's shaky handwriting. I need to go to Krakow, I said. 3 days later, I stood outside a refugee center in the heart of the city. The address had led me here, to a gray building with peeling paint and windows covered in missing person flyers. Inside, the halls smelled like disinfectant and desperation. A social worker checked her records. Krakow Center, room 247. Yes, she's here. Are you family? Friend, I said. Of her mother. The woman's face softened. Sad. Knowing. I'll take you up. Room 247 was small. 2 beds. A shared bathroom. Posters on the wall, bands I didn't recognize. Places I'd never been. And sitting on one of the beds, headphones on, staring out the window. A girl. 15, maybe. Dark hair like Katya's. Same eyes. Same stubborn chin. She looked up when I knocked. Pulled off the headphones. Yes? I stepped inside. Pulled out the photograph Katya's son. The frame still cracked, and watched the girl's face transform. Where did you get that? She whispered. Your mother. I sat down beside her. Katya. She was carrying it when she ran. She made it 300 meters before... Before what? The girl's voice was sharp. Afraid. Is she... I'm sorry. The words hung there. Heavy. Final. The girl, Anya, the social worker had called her, took the photograph with shaking hands, traced her finger over the cracked glass, over her brother's face. 300 meters, she said quietly. She tried. I put my hand over hers. She tried so hard to reach you. 300 meters isn't enough. No. I looked at Dimitri's uniform, folded on my lap, at the name stitched across the chest. But it's more than nothing. It's more than giving up. Anya held the photograph to her chest, and finally, she cried. I learned later from news broadcasts in the refugee center, from whispered conversations in the halls, that NATO had fired back hard after that night, that the corridor had saved thousands, that the Russians had pulled back from the border, regrouping, rethinking, that the war was shifting. But sitting there with Anya, watching through the window as the sun rose over Krakow, over a country that wasn't ours, would never be ours, I realized the truth. The real battle wasn't between NATO and Russia, wasn't between armies with jets and artillery and strategic corridors. It was between the people who ran and the people who couldn't. Between Katya's 300 meters and the 3,000 she never made. Between a photograph carried in desperate hope and a uniform folded in grief. Between giving up and trying anyway, even when trying wasn't enough. Anya looked up at me, her eyes red. Thank you for bringing her back to me. She never left you, I said. Through the open window, faint and distant, an air raid siren started to wail. Anya's hand tightened on the photograph. I reached over and took her other hand, squeezed it. It's far away, I said. We're safe here. But we both knew the truth. The war wasn't over. Wouldn't be over. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not for years. And it was only a matter of time before we heard that sound again. Closer, louder, until there was nowhere left to run. But for now, right now, in this moment, in this room, we were alive. And sometimes that had to be enough.